The night my mail carrier knocked on my door at 7 in the morning, I thought someone had died. That's the only reason I could think of. Nobody knocks at 7 in the morning unless something is wrong. I had just made my coffee. The smell was still filling the kitchen. That dark roast my daughter always says is too strong for a woman my age. And I remember setting the mug down slowly, the way you do when something in your body already knows before your mind catches up. I opened the door, and there he was. His name was Roy. He'd been delivering mail on my street for 11 years. He wasn't in his uniform. "Miss Elaine," he said. And he still called me that, even though I'd told him 100 times my name was just Elaine, not Miss anything. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen to the whole thing before you say a word." I let him in. I poured him a cup of that coffee my daughter hates. And he told me everything. I am 63 years old. I have lived in my house on Creston Avenue in Columbus, Ohio, for 22 years. I moved in when my husband Harold was still alive, when our daughter Vanessa was 12 and thought she hated everything, and when the oak tree in my front yard was still small enough that I could see the whole street from my porch. Harold passed 8 years ago. Vanessa lives 40 minutes away in Westerville with her husband and my 2 grandchildren. The oak tree now blocks most of the street, and I have learned to live with quiet in a way I never expected I would. I am not lonely. I want to say that clearly because people assume, a woman my age, living alone, they picture something grey and small. But my life is not grey. I have my church, my garden, my Tuesday card group, and my part-time work doing bookkeeping for 2 small businesses downtown. I drive myself everywhere. I cook real meals. I read until midnight more nights than I should. But I do live alone, and there are things about living alone that you only understand once you're in it. You notice people more, for one thing. When it's just you in a house, you start to pay attention to the rhythms outside it. The neighbor who walks her dog at the same time every morning. The teenager 3 houses down who always forgets to pull his trash bins back in. The sounds that belong and the sounds that don't. And the mail carrier. Roy had been part of my daily rhythm for so long that I stopped thinking of him as a stranger years ago. He was just Roy. Medium height, light brown skin, always wearing that same beaten-up pair of white New Balances that USPS certainly did not issue him. He had a little dog named Pretzel. I never saw the dog, but I heard about it constantly, and a grown son in the Air Force, and a way of waving at me through the window if I happened to be at my desk when he came up the walk. I started leading things out for him the winter before last. Nothing planned. The first time it was just that it was January and 17 degrees, and he looked like he was freezing through his jacket. I had leftover chicken soup on the stove. I put some in a thermos and left it on the porch railing with a sticky note. He knocked to say thank you. We talked for 4 minutes. He told me about Pretzel. I told him I had a cat named Nothing because she refused to answer to anything I tried. After that it became a habit. Not every day, not even every week. But when I cooked something extra, or made cornbread, or found a good sale on those oatmeal cookies with the icing that I knew he liked because he'd mentioned them once and I'd remembered, I'd leave something out. Sometimes in a container on the porch, sometimes in a small bag hanging from the mailbox so he didn't have to stop walking. He never expected it. That was the thing. Some people, you do something nice for them twice and the third time they start looking for it. Roy wasn't like that. Every single time he acted surprised, grateful in the real way, not the performed way. I didn't think much about it. It was just what I did. Harold used to say I fed people the way some women gossiped. Compulsively, as an expression of love I didn't always know how else to show. He wasn't wrong. Last October my daughter started coming around more than usual. Vanessa is not a worrier by nature. She is practical and a little impatient, and she loves me in a way that sometimes comes out sideways, as criticism or logistics. So when she started dropping by on weekday evenings, sitting at my kitchen table with that particular look on her face, careful, measuring, I knew something was off. I asked her directly the third time, "Vanessa, what is it?" She took a breath. "Mom, has anything strange been happening? With the house or the yard, or have you noticed anything unusual lately?" I thought about it genuinely. "No." "Why?" "Don has been driving past your street on his way home from work," she said. "Don is her husband. He thought he saw. It's probably nothing. He saw a car parked across from your house a few times. Same car, a few different nights. He just thought it was odd." I looked at her. A car. An older dark blue sedan, parked under the tree. He noticed because it was running, but no one got out. I didn't feel alarmed. I felt the way you feel when someone tells you there's a spider in the corner of the room, vaguely aware of something you'd rather not have to think about. I told her I'd pay attention. She told me to keep my doors locked, which I already did. She left, and I went back to my book, and I mostly forgot about it. 3 nights later, I woke up at 2 in the morning. I don't know what woke me. There wasn't a sound I could identify, just that feeling, the way the air in a house changes when something is different, that made me lie still in the dark for a long moment before I got up. I went to the bedroom window, the one that faces the street. There was a car parked under the oak tree, dark-colored. I couldn't tell the exact shade in the dark, but it wasn't a car I recognized, and it wasn't in front of any house where it made sense to be. It was just there, idling. I could see the faint exhaust in the cold air. I stood at that window for 10 minutes. Nobody got out. Nobody walked past. Eventually the car pulled away slowly, no headlights until it reached the corner, and then it was gone. I went back to bed. I didn't sleep again until almost 5. I didn't call Vanessa. I didn't want to worry her from a single incident I couldn't explain, but I started paying attention in a different way after that. The kind of attention that lives in your chest instead of your eyes. Here is what I knew about my neighbor across the street. The man who had lived in the grey house with the always drawn blinds for going on 3 years. His name was Mitchell. I knew that from when he moved in and came over briefly to introduce himself. A courtesy call that lasted less than 2 minutes and felt more like a formality than a neighborly act. He was somewhere in his early 50s. He drove a company truck with a plumbing logo on the side, though I never saw him in work clothes. He had a woman over sometimes, a different one every few months. He never waved. He rarely came outside except to move his car or take his bins to the curb. I had no reason to think anything bad about him. He was just a man who kept to himself. Plenty of people do. But I had noticed, in the weeks after the car incident, that I saw him more than I used to. Outside on his porch at odd hours, standing at the edge of his driveway looking up the street. Once, when I came home from the grocery store, I could have sworn I saw him step back from his front window as I pulled in. I mentioned it to no one. It felt too vague, too much like the paranoia of a woman living alone, the kind of thing people would pat your hand about. The morning Roy knocked on my door, not in his uniform. I had not connected any of those pieces yet. I sat across from him at my kitchen table and I listened. He held his coffee cup in both hands, not drinking it, just holding it. He told me that for the past few weeks on his route, he had been noticing a man watching my house, not driving past, watching, standing near the tree at the end of my block for stretches of time, or sitting in a parked car. Roy had seen him 6 separate times. The man didn't seem to notice Roy. Mail carriers become invisible, he said. People don't clock you any more than they clock a fire hydrant. So Roy had been watching without being watched back. I took a picture, he said. He slid his phone across the table. The man in the picture was Mitchell. I set the phone down. I didn't say anything for a moment. He was near your mailbox twice, Roy said. Once I was coming up the street, and I saw him step back quick. The second time he had something in his hand. I couldn't tell what. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" I asked. And even as I said it, I heard how it sounded like blame, so I shook my head. "I don't mean it that way. I wasn't sure," he said. "I didn't want to scare you over nothing. But 2 weeks ago my son called and I was telling him about it. He's stationed at Wright-Patterson, you know, and he said, 'Dad, that's not nothing. A man watching a woman's house on a pattern isn't nothing.'" I thought about the car parked under the tree at 2 in the morning, the figure at the window, the uneasy feeling I had been carrying in my chest and telling myself was foolishness. "Elaine," Roy said, and for the first time in 11 years he dropped the miss, "I think you should call someone today." I called Vanessa first. Then, at her insistence, I called the non-emergency police line. What followed was 3 weeks that I do not enjoy remembering, not because they were violent or dramatic in the way of movies, but because of the particular exhaustion of being disbelieved, or half-believed, or believed in a way that still requires you to prove yourself at every step. The officer who came out was polite. He was also visibly skeptical. A man parking on a public street, he explained, was not illegal. Watching a house from public property was not illegal. Without a specific threat or incident, there was not much to be done. I showed him the photograph Roy had taken. He looked at it. He said he'd make a note. Vanessa was furious. Don was furious in the quieter way that is sometimes worse. Roy filed a formal report of his own observations because his son had told him to document everything in writing. I bought better locks for my doors. I had Vanessa's husband check my windows. I started leaving a light on in the front room all night, which I had never done before, which Harold would have objected to on principle about the electricity bill. And I waited. The thing that broke it open had nothing to do with any of us. It had to do with a woman 2 streets over named, and I hesitate to say, because even now it feels like her story to tell, a woman I'll call my neighbour's neighbour, who I had met once at a block association meeting 3 years prior. She had filed a report of her own, independently, about someone matching Mitchell's description accessing her mailbox. A different officer, a different precinct district, but the same system. When Roy's report was cross-referenced because his son had advised him on exactly how to write it, bless that young man, the connection was made. What Mitchell had been doing, across several addresses over at least 2 years, was a form of mail theft and identity fraud. He would identify women living alone, elderly or semi-elderly, and he would intercept financial mail, statements, pre-approved credit offers. In one case, a Social Security correspondence. He would photograph or copy documents and use the information to open fraudulent lines of credit. He was patient. He watched first for weeks sometimes to learn routines and gauge risk before he ever touched a mailbox. He had been watching my house because he had already collected enough information from my mailbox the previous spring, before I had any idea, and he was deciding whether to proceed to the next step. The spring, I thought back. I had received a notice that April from my bank about an inquiry on my credit. I called and they told me it was likely a soft pull from a pre-approval and not to worry about it. I had not worried about it. I should have worried about it. He was arrested on a Thursday. I was not there. I heard about it from Vanessa, who heard about it from Dom, who heard about it from a detective who had called to tell us we might be contacted for a statement. I sat in my kitchen and I cried, not from fear or even relief exactly, from something more complicated, the anger of having been targeted, the helplessness of how long it had been happening without my knowledge, and underneath all of it, the strange grace of having been protected by a man in New Balance sneakers who noticed things because that was simply how he moved through the world. 2 days after the arrest, Roy came by on his regular route. He handed me a water bill and a catalogue I hadn't asked for, same as always. I had baked a sweet potato pie the night before. I handed it to him through the door. He looked at it for a moment. He looked at me. His eyes got a little bright at the edges, which he would probably deny if you asked him. "You don't have to keep doing this, you know," he said. "I know," I said. "I want to." He nodded slowly. "How are you sleeping?" "Better," I said, which was mostly true. "How's Pretzel?" He laughed, really laughed, the kind that comes from somewhere genuine. "She chewed through her third leash this month. Vet says she might have anxiety." "A dog with anxiety," I said. "That sounds like a lot of work." "She's worth it," he said, in the easy way of someone stating an obvious fact. He went on down the street. I stood at my door and watched him go. That familiar walk, the bag over one shoulder, the white sneakers a little grey now from all the miles. And I thought about how many people pass through our days without us seeing them, really seeing them. We look right through the mail carriers and the grocery clerks and the people who have learned to be invisible because the world trained them to expect not to be noticed. Roy noticed me, and because I had once, on a cold January day, thought to warm up a stranger who delivered my mail in the freezing cold, he noticed when something was wrong. My daughter wants me to consider moving closer to her. We have had this conversation 3 times since October. Each time I listen to her all the way through, which is something she says I never used to do, and then I tell her the same thing. This is my home. I planted the hosta beds along the foundation myself. Harold's name is written in the concrete of the back patio, the way you do when the concrete is fresh, and you press a stick into it just to say, "We were here." I know which step on the staircase creaks, and which burner on the stove runs hot, and which corner of the yard gets the best morning light for the tomatoes. I'm not leaving because something frightening happened here. Frightening things happen everywhere. The question is whether you are paying attention, and whether the people around you are paying attention too. I've started getting to know my other neighbours more. The young woman 2 doors down who moved in last spring with a baby and a minivan and an expression of permanent exhaustion. I brought her a casserole and we ended up talking for 40 minutes on her porch. The retired man on the corner who fixes small engines in his garage and leaves his door open whenever the weather is good. I stop and wave now instead of just driving past. Small things. The kind that cost nothing but time and a little of yourself. I cannot promise they will protect me from everything. Nothing protects you from everything. But I am less alone than I was this time last year, and that matters in ways I am still learning to measure. There is one more thing I want to say, and I want to say it plainly. In the weeks after all of this happened, more than one person said something to me that was meant kindly but landed wrong. They said I was lucky. What a coincidence, they said, that you happened to do something nice for your mail carrier. What luck that he was paying attention. I have thought about that word, lucky. I don't think it was luck. I think it was accumulation. 11 years of small kindnesses, none of them calculated, none of them performed for any audience, all of them just genuine. Just me being who I am, doing what I do, the way Harold said I fed people the way others gossip, because I couldn't help it. Roy is who he is, a man who notices, a man whose son raised him right, or maybe Roy raised his son right, and the son gave it back to him when it mattered. A man who saw something wrong, and didn't look away from it, and didn't talk himself out of it, because it wasn't technically his business. None of that is luck. That's just people choosing, over and over again in small, quiet ways, to give a damn about each other. I am 63 years old. I have lived long enough to know that most of the things that save us don't look like salvation when they're happening. They look like a thermos of soup on a cold morning. They look like a man in worn-out sneakers remembering your name. They look like nothing at all until the day they look like everything. Be kind, not because the world will always be kind back, not because you will always see the return, but because it is the truest thing you can do with the time you have, and because you never know, you simply never know, who is watching out for you in ways you cannot see. I've been sitting with this story for months now, turning it over the way you turn a stone in your hand, feeling the weight of it, the edges, everything it took to get here. What I keep coming back to is not the arrest, not the detective's phone call, not the locks I bought, not even the night I stood at my window watching that car idle under the oak tree. What I keep coming back to is a January afternoon when I had leftover soup on the stove and I thought, that man out there is cold. That's it. That's where it started. Not a plan, not a calculation. Just a woman who couldn't watch someone be cold without doing something about it. I think that's what people mean when they talk about having a good character, not the grand gestures, not the charity events or the public declarations, but the small private choices you make when no one is keeping score, the choice to see someone who the rest of the world has learned to look through. I made that choice for 11 years without ever thinking of it as a choice at all. Roy made his own version of it every single day on that route, noticing, remembering, caring about the details of other people's lives, even when his job only required him to deliver their mail. What Roy did took something more than a good heart, though. It took a kind of clear-eyed attention, the willingness to trust what he was seeing, even when it would have been easier and more comfortable to tell himself it wasn't his business. A lot of people would have done exactly that. Most people do. They see something that doesn't sit right and they find a reason to walk past it. Roy didn't. He watched carefully, he documented, he listened to his son's advice, and he acted at the right moment. That kind of thinking, disciplined, honest, willing to follow an uncomfortable truth to its end, is something I have a new respect for. It cannot be faked, and it cannot be borrowed. You either cultivate it or you don't. And then there is the matter of showing up. Roy came to my door on his day off. He sat across from me at my kitchen table and told me something hard. He filed a formal report when the police weren't listening because his son told him to document everything, and he did, carefully, completely, without giving up when the first door closed in his face. That is not easy. It is much easier to say, "You tried," to make one call and let it rest. It takes a particular kind of backbone to keep going when the system is slow and the people with authority seem unbothered. Roy had that backbone. And because he did, Mitchell was stopped before he could do more damage than he already had. I think about the women he had already targeted, the 1-2 streets over whose story I will never fully know. I wonder how many others there were, how many people who had no Roy watching from the sidewalk, no thread connecting the right people at the right moment. I was not lucky. I was connected in the oldest and most ordinary way to someone who paid attention. That connection started with soup. It was kept alive by oatmeal cookies and cornbread, and 11 years of small recognitions. His dog's name, his son's base, the way he carried himself on a cold morning. None of it was strategic. All of it was real. I am 63 years old, and here is what I know. The life you build through consistent, honest, quiet goodness is not a passive life. It is, in fact, the most active thing you can do. Every small act of decency is a thread. You don't always see the fabric until you need it. Roy is still my mail carrier. I still leave things out for him. Nothing has changed, except that now I understand more clearly what I was doing all along.